Welcome to a community built of tomorrow's business leaders. Hey guys, I'm William Freitas, and this is the Socius Podcast. Welcome back to the Socius Podcast. Today we have Blake McCullough on the show. Blake, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having us.
We're super excited to have you on the show. Blake and I have known each other for quite a little while, and I guess you run a successful digital marketing agency, really?
Yeah, in advertising.
And advertising, and successfully won, what was it, Marketing Agency of the Year?
Yeah, we won the Australian Small Business Champion Awards, Best Marketing Services 2020.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, just recently. It was meant to be an award we should have won last year, but COVID impacted the date of the ceremony. So, we ended up getting it this year.
Mate, huge accolade. So, congrats on the win. And
thank you.
Awesome to have you on the show. So, I guess we start all podcasts pretty much the same. Like, we want to dive into who Blake McCullough is and what had you get to where you are today. Obviously, you run a successful business, which is fantastic. But tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have a sob story whatsoever, so sorry to disappoint there. But I born in Sydney, grew up in Cronulla. A bit of a sort of a ocean baby, as you could maybe
down
call
south,
it. Down south, the Shire. So respect to all the Shire peeps listening.
Bondi boy now, though.
Currently live in Bondi, so I've transformed over to the eastern suburbs, but mostly for the convenience of work. I've had a great upbringing, with a small family, mum and dad, with one brother. Went to school in Newington, so had the ability to, live and sort of socialise in a community like Cronulla, and go to school in Newington, which was a private school in the GPS, which was in Newtown. So did a lot of travel growing up, back and forth from Cronulla to Newington. Was a good hour and a half one way, so 3 hours back and forth on the train from year 4 onwards up until I got my license to drive in year 11. It taught me very quickly that there's things outside of the Shire. There's a city out there.
Absolutely.
Also just had, a great network is probably the biggest thing that I took out of being in such a rich community as Cronulla is, without the tourism that you get in Bondi and Manly and other beaches, and obviously having a huge infrastructure that a school like Newington can give you, which I think is the biggest draw card, comparing, maybe a local school to a bit more of a private school is the connections that you formalise outside of your local community. So I guess from, my parents instilling that education in me, and my brother, and, investing in our future through education, that led me on to wanting to go to university. Luckily was able to get into the degree that I wanted to do, which was the Bachelor of Business at UTS. So that sort of kick-started, the eye-opener to the real world. A few of my other friends went down to the University of Wollongong, was fortunate enough to get into UTS. So I was pretty confused with what I wanted to do after school, to be honest with you. My parents both sort of have always done their own thing, so I guess I've always had that entrepreneurial drive in my blood. They've been in hospitality, restaurants, nightclubs, property investing. My mum's done her own thing in fashion, beauty, day spas, that sort of stuff. My dad was probably the biggest sort of instigator in watching him build his own sort of empire for us and the family, and me wanting to do the same. And I guess I just never really had that 9-to-5 corporate spirit, that sort of was the initiation of eventually starting my business. But through university, if anyone's done a Bachelor of Business degree or Commerce degree out there, they know how confusing and generic it can be. You learn a bit of everything, and because I was not really sure, I used to always admire people that would say, I want to be a firefighter or whatever it is, an accountant in finance, and be really specific with what they wanted to do and stick to it. Whereas I had zero idea, and the Bachelor of Business degree taught me a little about a lot of things, right? And then after university, I got my first job in TV advertising, so got sort of the taste of, I guess, the marketing world in a sense. Quickly found out that wasn't for me. Didn't really like the huge structure of an organisation that was called Foxtel Media, or is called Foxtel Media now. And it lasted about a year there, and then went to work for a small business after then. And that's what taught me a lot about how a business operates and how a business can, start from the ground up. So that second job was for an event company, and I was a marketing manager. So that's where I learned all the skills to eventually equip myself to start GMS. But it wasn't just that job, it was also the mentorship I had with my boss at the time. And he's also now still a client of my agency, which is funny. So he's been quite instrumental, and a few other, key people in my life that have aided that transition from, working from a corporate structure to a small business to then ultimately starting my own business. So I think, super important to not only have that education around you. I always had the thinking about wanting to start my own business, and, also had the experience too. I wasn't just straight out of uni going, I'm going to start my business, even though some people can do that. And but it's not for the majority. But I think all those little things add up to a big thing, which then enables you to take those risks and sort of take the leap of faith. It wasn't until after my third job, which was with a tech company, they did a lot of media monitoring, that I eventually realized that no matter who I was going to work for, I wasn't going to be happy. So that's when I started consulting with digital marketing, and then eventually started GMS and found a business partner, and then here we are 4 or 5 years later.
Perfect. And let's take you back to the Shire.
Yeah, back to the roots.
Nothing wrong with the Shire, folk.
No.
But let's take you back to the Shire. It sounds like your family had a real entrepreneurial background.
Yeah.
What do you think the things were that, I guess, your mum, your dad, your brother taught you that sort of set you up to win later on?
Yeah, it's just the constant, just philosophical speeches from my dad, whether he was having a few drinks or just general conversations around, if we're looking to get support, then our parents would always be there to sort of guide us through that. And at the end of the day, we're all a mold of our environment. From what we get conditioned from 0 to 7 years is what we're told to do from our parents and, who's around us at the time, whether it's our grandparents, our parents, or guardians. We're subconsciously conditioned that way. So, I think that a lot of the things and the sort of conversations I used to have, particularly with my dad, was, working for someone, you're not going to get anywhere, or, the only way to make money is to work for yourself. Just those simple little conversations that were repeatedly, talked about. But also more so just seeing them do it is probably the biggest thing. And I think coming from such a great education, a great upbringing, you could sort of look at it in two ways. You could go path A, I'm just going to, have a cushy job and just get spoon-fed. Or option B, I want to do what they've done and try and do it myself, and that inspires me. And I took that path and, just really wanted to have a crack on my own to see if I could do it. And because I was so inspired and admired what they had done on their own, and seeing the adversity that they went through, and, lots of deals going south, some deals going north. It was admirable to watch all that. And having the freedom and the flexibility to enjoy life was, I think, another thing that I really admired.
That's what I want to touch on too. I guess you would have probably experienced some of their failures, and deals going south. There will be plenty of entrepreneurs out there, myself included. There was no entrepreneurial background per se, so there wasn't necessarily that depth of knowledge or experience that we could tap into or be developed, I guess, as we're growing up. But undoubtedly there were some lessons that, your family taught you that most other families also taught their kids. So it's not necessarily that they needed to have an entrepreneurial background, but it's that mindset, how to deal with failure, how to react when deals go south. I suspect there were some elements there that, your dad probably got more philosophical as he had a few beers, much like my father was. But no doubt, as you were growing up, there were some elements of more mindset, I guess, based around how do you react to this, Blake?
Yeah. I saw. From when I was born till high school, the main source of business that my parents operated was a seafood restaurant in Cronulla. Prior to that, my dad had a nightclub with one of his friends, then met my mum. Then they opened up a famous award-winning seafood restaurant in Cronulla. And that burnt down, I think, when I was in year 7, just when I hit high school. But they had it for about 12 years. So, yeah, seeing like me, like that's all I knew was them having that restaurant and operating. I used to get the train home from school and walk down and have to wait till my parents finish work. Yeah. So again, that's like the work ethic that my mum had, and both my dad, dad was the sort of visionary creator, set up the deals. Mum was the operator. So they work very well together, both in a relationship, but also a business sense, similar to my business partner. We're very polar opposite, but that's important. You need to have the complementary skill sets. So, yeah, having that work ethic that I saw around me from such a young age, I think it was inevitable that I was going to do something on my own. Yeah. And then, having that restaurant burn down literally before my eyes, we lived down the road and woke up and we could see the smoke coming up from it one morning, and it was on the news and everything. So, yeah, that adversity hit pretty hard for me as a kid, not really understanding what was going on and what the repercussions of such a thing is. Yeah. And then just seeing my dad just go, cool, all right, on to the next thing, don't worry about that. And then just, set up other little ventures, and, he ended up investing into a few different businesses and land opportunities in Cronulla. Then eventually, in the later years of my high school, he went into pubs and had about 6 pubs in Queensland. So he went from, restaurant burning to setting up a few small businesses in Cronulla to then having, a multitude of pubs in a portfolio worth tens of millions pretty quickly. So that was like, seeing that unfold before my eyes, and just that was quite cool to watch. But then the GFC hit, and again, almost lost everything. So it's just like, with every success, there is that challenge, and also, every entrepreneur faces some sort of loss eventually, right? That's what they say.
Well, and adversity. I guess that's the number one thing. You probably get a heap of people wanting to ask, particularly successful business owners, like, what's the number one tip that you've got for me in business when I'm setting up a business? And what I'm hearing is, particularly, I know in my family, and it sounds like your family, the biggest learning, there wasn't one particular line. Thanks, Dad. Appreciate that. I'll take that for the rest of my life. But it was that continual resilience to take on risk. Yeah. So it really sounded like your dad, your mum sort of had, risk is the nature of what we do.
High risk, high return. That was another one of his remarks. He used to always tell us, high risk, high return. Yeah, so it is true. You have to, if you're going to be willing to take those risks, you also got to be okay with losing a few deals here and there. Yeah. I don't invest myself, but, I know that, big portfolios of people investing into businesses, they might have 10 businesses stacked up that they invest money into, hoping that 1 or 2 will come off, knowing that 8 will fail. Yeah. That's just the way that it works, right? Like, not every business is going to be successful, particularly on it, even if they are going through that, that investment process. It's just not a sure thing. Nothing's a sure thing.
And take me to, I guess, the next step, because I guess this is often, a generalization that I hear a lot. Private school boys. Let's touch on that a little bit, because my view is that you can put anyone in private school doesn't mean they're going to be successful.
No way. No.
Yes, they are going to build a network, and you probably see that. You're probably obviously a new into an old boy, but I'm sure that hasn't led to your success, and it's not a fact of where you put somebody in school. It's also how they apply themselves and that background to that. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I totally agree with that. Doesn't matter where you go to school. I've seen people I went to school with at Newington who are in jail that are, have not really done anything, that have, there's lots of little things that you can see go wrong in a private school. As I said before, with the 2 paths that I feel that I could have that I had a sort of decision with. It's just, I think the biggest, there's no difference to the learning, or not that I'm aware of, without, having gone to, a different school during high school. So I stuck with the one school. I know a few people do jump around, so they might be better at answering that sort of question. But, I think the network, I feel, was probably just the biggest draw card out of it, given that you've got more of an outreach around Sydney as a whole, versus just the local community. That's just the way I looked at it. Yeah. It was a very regimented sort of school as well. You have to play sport. You have to sort of show up on the weekend. It's 6 days a week. It's not 5 days. You're training twice a week as well. So the schedule and the routine, I feel, was also something that that really helped. That I had to take with me through uni and also work. But then again, that's something that, most people will have to deal with eventually anyway.
Yeah.
So I feel for me, like we've just got, my year particular, we had probably 20 or 30 different boys in my year that grew up in the Shire. So we had half a carriage full of people within my year alone, mixing with other girls' schools as well that we used to travel with. So we just had a bit of a freak year when it came to that network, and particularly people from my own area. But then we also had a whole other network from Northern Sydney and, other people that are boarding at the school. So it does just open your eye a little bit more, I feel,
I think there's
from
something,
a younger age.
I think there's something in that as well. Like I went to a Catholic school out in Northwest around Castle Hill, and, we didn't have sport on the weekend. We went there 6 days a week, but I think that regiment, it's quite easy for us to bash private schools. It's so easy.
It's always the conflict of public and private schools. Even growing up, it was the same thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I guess what I'm pointing to is there's something more to that. There's something around that regiment, that discipline of being there 6 days a week, or even, your parents probably would have given up their weekends to support you lads. Especially in that.
You know what, I think back to that, I'm like, wow, like they just would have been so annoying driving us to sport, like picking us up after hours twice a week and then travelling to all the other GPS schools all over Sydney, which is sometimes an hour and a half away from Cronulla, every weekend, giving up your whole Saturday and then carpooling with other kids in the back, eating Maccas, spilling it all over your car. It's full on for the parent.
Let's not chat about big nights and everything else.
We used to get McDonald's after every training session.
Yeah.
But no, it's full on. It's a full commitment. But not only that, like the expense, like when we used to go to school, it was probably a fifth of the cost of what it is now, right?
Yeah.
The waiting list is huge too. I know that there's a massive waiting list to even go to Newington these days. I'm sure it's the same with most other GPS schools. The cost of it's astronomical. If you've got 3 kids, then it's the average income in just like, supporting school.
100. So tough question. Is it worth it?
I definitely am appreciative that I did go to Newington over, if it was Scots, then, that would have been great too. They were the 2 options that we had, Newington and Scots, with mostly just because of the proximity. Yeah. I'm very, very appreciative that I went, but I don't think it would have fundamentally changed me as a person if I didn't go.
Yeah.
For, people deciding on that, I don't think it's a right or wrong thing. It just comes down to personal preference.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it doesn't matter what pedigree of school you go to. I think it depends on the upbringing that you have and how your family has fostered that. So, mate, it's fantastic to see where you've obviously come from, a Shire boy now into where you are now, successfully running your business. But tell me why TV ads? Like, why'd you jump into that?
Mate, I literally, I was after uni, finished the degree, then I went to Canada snowboarding for 3.5-4 months. Yeah. Just drank and snowboarded every day for about 4 months straight. I didn't even get a job over there because the salary was about $10 an hour in a bar. So I was like, what's the point? I'm going to enjoy myself. And that was sort of just the, after uni celebration. Didn't do a gap year. That's probably something that I wish I did do. Mm-hmm. If I had my time back, I probably would have done a semester overseas. That would have been awesome to do. Mm-hmm. But yeah, look, I just got home, and after that holiday, I just applied for 100 things, as you do when you're looking for work, not really knowing, and still then didn't really know what I wanted to do. And, went to a few interviews that just didn't really fit, others that I didn't get the job. And then finally, interviewed at the company was called MCN back then. And my boss at the time, or the boss of the portfolio I was sort of interviewing for, just gave me basically offered me the job on the spot, and I was just ready to take anything. And it wasn't the fact that it was just, I believe everything happens for a reason, and that job was awesome. One, exposed me to big brands and how they operate from, a digital or TV spend, I should say. I had an awesome boss, had an awesome team around me. The culture was really young. They did a lot of events as well culturally. So I did learn a lot in that 12 to 14 months I was there. So, it was a combination of just being a bit scattergun with my approach to that first job, but also, synchronistically, I feel things do happen for a reason, and I was meant to get that job and meant to sort of be there to kickstart my career.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer. It's right place, right time.
Totally.
Everything happens for a reason. How many roles did you apply for before you got that role?
Oh, mate, I would have between that and my second job, probably just 20, 30 applications, maybe more. Who knows? I remember just one day just going, application, hit, send. So lots of cover letters and lots of resumes later.
Mate, I ask that particularly because I feel like, particularly a lot of the younger generation, get a knockback on 1 or 2, 3 jobs, and it's like game over.
Yeah,
significant.
So true.
And so it's good to see that you've taken that resilience, obviously, and continued that through.
Yeah.
And then what had you start GMS?
Yeah, so again, it wasn't. I mean, in my head, even before that first job, I always said to myself that I eventually want to work for myself. That's really the internal dialogue I had that did lead to it. I never said that I wanted to start a marketing agency or run ads for a living. That was never a conversation. But I guess just with the timeline of, working in TV advertising, then going and being a marketing manager, and then working in a PR monitoring tool, all sort of related to marketing, PR, advertising, it sort of just formed my skill set. And when I started consulting to, start doing something on my own, and that was, I only started doing that at my third job around 2015-ish. I started to consult and just sort of did a bit of everything. I was consulting with doing advertising, websites, CRM management, anything that client wanted to get help with, I would sort of just, do everything I could. And then soon realize that, consulting and being a utility to everything is not a way to scale the business at all. So found out that, Facebook advertising was one of the most in-demand things then at the time. And that led to start GMS as an agency. I was originally with a business partner that did copywriting. Met him through my first client that I had in the consulting game. We sort of banded together to kickstart GMS. And that was sort of synchronistically as I was part-time with that third job, and then went full-time in 2017. And as at the moment I went full-time, that business partner ended up peeling away. He was off. He was doing his own thing, just had a kid. So basically, quit my job, settled on my unit, had to come up with all this money, and then my business partner decided to leave. But it was actually, again, everything happens for a reason. That was important for me, as I just had to put 100% commitment to it and, jump ship. And if you're doing things half-assed, and that's what I sort of found out quickly is I was, working part-time for one job, trying to build my business on the side. There's only so long you can do that for. I think it's very important to, not check out of one hotel without having the next room booked. And that's what I did. I was methodical in the way that I sort of built the brand, but also realizing the time of when is good to jump ship.
So often we hear of so many side hustles growing, which is fantastic. I'm a big believer and encourager for side hustles, but I think what you pointed out was super key. There's a balance between side hustling and then a balance between actually committing to it and making it grow. Because I know, you can create so many different little ideas, so many different little side businesses, but once you dive balls deep, it's like you're going to make it work, and it just works. So it's interesting what you noted on that in regards to, you wanted to actually push into it despite even the fact that, your business partner pulled out. Now, I want to talk to you about business partnerships because as I understand it, you've currently got a business partner in GMS? Yeah,
I do. So when I sort of started, full time, and that was the first year on my own, I had a good friend of mine who was helping me out, so I ended up bringing him into the business. He's more the operations officer of the business. I'm more the CEO of the brand, even though we don't try not to sort of call each other those names. It's probably not applicable to, an SME, but where we work very differently, and that's helped the business a lot.
And talk us through, I guess, what metrics you had before bringing him on, because we've had people on the show already sort of talking to us about how they've been in failed partnerships, and you've spoken about how that first partnership you were in didn't necessarily work out, or they pulled the plug.
But he was also that initial partnership was also fundamental to even start it in the first place. So again, it's just having people come and go. They serve their purpose sometimes. But yeah, without that initial partner, probably wouldn't have got it to where it was in order to then have the confidence to go full time. So yeah, I appreciate everyone who sort of has helped me out along the way.
So there's something already in that mindset, Blake, that it's like, well, you could have easily seen that as a failure and been a little bit sour by it.
No, it was so amicable. It was fine.
You are so I guess accepting of what has occurred and just taking that on with a positive mindset. Now, what do you think some tips are for a successful partnership? Because obviously you're in one that is successful. Yeah. What are some of those tips?
I think I think I was just lucky with, his name's Simon, my business partner currently. So I don't know if you've done the DISC personality test.
Yep.
I think if anyone's thinking about getting into business listening today, I would suggest perhaps doing that test. And if you're both in the D category, so to split it out, there's 4 quadrants. There's dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. If you've got 2 partners that are both dominant, you're probably going to butt heads. So I'm a DI. So you sort of got like one major, one sub-major category. And Simon, he's I think he's SC or CS. So he's basically the polar opposite, meaning that his personality suits really well on more consistency, steadiness, operational stuff, where that stuff would probably burn me out pretty quickly. So I'm more situated in the business where I can, get out there, be sort of the promoter of the business, the face of it, do the talent, the hiring, the financials, all the front end stuff, and he's more the back end stuff. Yeah. So without that delegation and understanding each other's roles, you'd step on each other's feet a lot. If we both were trying to do the same thing, then that would quickly not work. So I think personality testing there's a lot of merit in that, not only for partnerships, but also who you hire, having a healthy mix of a few different things and a few different personalities. And just understanding your strengths and weaknesses and having a clear set of objectives and roles as well is super important.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice. Have you read Gino Wickman's Traction? The book itself?
Is that the EOS?
The EOS system.
Yeah, I've read a little bit of it.
So that talks about how you've got the visionary and the integrator, and that's very much how I see it. It's
Steve Jobs and
roles.
Yeah,
correct.
Steve Jobs and his partner. If you look up all those huge companies, they've got the visionary and the implementer.
Absolutely, and I think that's the key when, particularly anyone listening to this podcast, it's an entrepreneur thinking about getting into business with a business partner, because that's often the easiest way or most attractive way not to take on that risk 100% on your own. Some would call us mad, but anyway. But they'll get into that and they want to know, okay, what's the key difference? And I think what you've pointed out is so true. It's personality testing. Yeah. There are various other personality tests that people can do outside of DISC as well. But also that Gino Wickman book, I highly recommend for everyone to have a look, have a read in regards to Traction, because it does talk about how the visionary has the creative nature, but isn't necessarily reliable to get something done, and that's why they need an integrator to make sure things get done. They're the doers. They're the ones who aren't necessarily creative, but they're going to get the stuff done.
Yeah, having the ability, if you are a visionary or an ideas person, having the ability to delegate and build a team around you to be able to facilitate those ideas.
Absolutely.
I always have like a list of projects in front of me, and I'm thinking 3 months ahead with those projects and looking a year ahead in the business and, setting those goals up. But without the team and people around me, none of that's going to get done.
100%.
Yeah.
That probably leads us greatly into, I guess, now you've got GMS.
Yeah.
Fantastic award. What would you say is the number one key factor of success for you today?
I think, we're not a new agency by any means. A lot of other agencies have had a lot faster growth. They're a lot bigger. You've got a lot more staff than us. We've done things a little bit more methodical. I've always thought of myself as more of a marketer, creative person, and not as such, a hardcore salesman. I've sort of taught myself sales along the way. I've now got a sales team and building that out, as do I with the account management team. So I'm not sort of remove myself from the operations of it. But look, it took us a while to get our shit together, to be honest. We always had a great brand. We've worked with some great clients. I think just having that USP and that that niche is super important. That
USP
niche
being unique.
So unique selling point. So so like we initially just did Facebook ads for small businesses, and then we've now evolved to be a bit more omni-channel. So we're basically an advertising solution across all platforms that we can buy media through directly, across social, search, and programmatic. But I think the fact that we've just stuck in our lane, we've just stuck to advertising.
Yeah.
We've got services outside of that that support the ad campaigns. We've got copywriting, graphic design, strategy, a bit of funnel development and web development that goes with the ad campaigns. But things like, videography, SEO, other things to do with outside of advertising, social media posting, we will partner with other agencies to help support that for our clients, because I just feel sticking in our lane allows us to have that point of difference across such a competitive marketplace.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to be, and when I was consulting, I was sort of like trying to do everything, and I just quickly knew that it's so hard to try and do everything for everybody. So either having like a niche in an industry or having a niche as a service, it's just important, I think, at the start to pick that, and then you can sort of expand and grow thereafter. But yeah, there's no point trying to have 10 different products and serving every person in the world, because it's very hard to cut through the clutter. And not to say that you can't build a successful business trying to do everything, because there's lots of agencies out there that fulfill on all the services, and they are a full service agency and they've got lots of clients, but they've also got a 100-person office. They've got a lot of overheads, and with comes that a lot of stress and headaches. And I just didn't really feel like that was us to begin with, until we found our feet properly. And now we do. We're starting to scale and grow. But again, we probably will just continue to stick in our lane as much as possible.
It's interesting you say that, because I almost sometimes have a contrary view, in the sense that I like the idea of a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
But I also get the argument against it in saying that you can't necessarily be a specialist of all things. Or you can't be, everything to everyone. So there's an argument for and against, but it's been interesting that you found that niche, and that's where you want to target.
I think, you can totally make it work. It's just, I feel a lot harder. The quality of work becomes diminished very quickly.
Right.
And you're paying, if someone's paying an agency the same fees they're paying us to do 10 things, and they're probably going to do a mediocre job across those 10 things, or maybe not as great as a job. They're not going to go as deep into that one thing that might be a bigger priority for the business. Yeah. So people come to us because they know that they want a premium service with advertising. It's one of the biggest priorities that they face, and that's why they work with us. And if it's not a big priority for them, or they're not at that level yet, then we gladly turn them away, and they might go to a cheaper solution. But we'd rather just go super deep into that one alley and do a really good job of it.
Look, I think a strong argument for that particularly is that you, by sticking to your lane and your particular service, allows the possibility for you to gain referrals from other service
strategic
providers
partnerships.
As well. In your space, it's videography. You don't do the videography, but no doubt you work with other videographers who then, once they get approached by a client who then needs some advertising spend, you're the person to go to. So it does, that's a strong, argument for it, that it kind of opens up your distribution channel to suppliers and accepting referrals. So I can totally see why that would have worked. Yeah,
strategic partnerships have been key for us. Exactly like where we met at Cub Business Club. We've been a member there since day one, I think 4 or 5 years now. So almost pretty much from the day one when I started GMS. That's been such a great facility to network with other businesses, not only from a clientele point of view, but also to form partnerships. And we've done so. I've even started another agency, no longer with that agency, but had the ability to, start lots of partnerships and strategic partnerships to increase our network. Because we're not just, even though we say we focus on advertising, we do so much more for businesses. We'll focus end to end, both from a strategic level and execution level, with advertising as a whole. But we also provide business advice, and we go really sort of horizontal across other areas of the business that we might be able to help with. And even though we're not doing the work, for instance, the videography side of things, if we feel that they're lacking in that area, we will gladly give them advice and point them over to one of our strategic partners to fulfill that. So yeah, we sort of think of us as like growth advisory as well as advertising management.
Perfect.
Because I think it's important to, a lot of agencies will just expect the client to direct the agency and maybe give them what they feel is necessary from an asset point of view. But there's so many times where we sign up a client and they go, here's our imagery, here's our videos, here's our copywriting, here's our message.
Yeah.
And if it's crap, of course we're not going to run it because we're just wasting that client's money. We have to openly say, look, I think you need a bit of work on this. Let us help you with that. Yep. Anything we're not doing in-house, and we'll pull in our specialist to fulfill that. So we've got accountability with managing over, $10 million a year of ad spend across, 40 or 50 clients. We need to have that accountability and responsibility to ensure that the level of work is carried out to the highest quality. And with that is, picking apart those gaps and leaks and poor assets that the client sends over.
Yeah. It's so funny you talk about particularly network and how that can develop your network.
Yeah.
As much as I hate the saying, your network is your net worth.
It's one of my favourites. Cliche, but love it.
I hate the saying.
Yeah.
But it rings so true where leveraging relationships can be the difference between success and not succeeding. But one of the things, and I'll get your thoughts on this, is I really think leveraging relationships doesn't have to be inauthentic. It doesn't have to be with an ulterior purpose.
No.
You can, I guess, go by life building relationships with people you know, like, and trust, and still have a commercial, benefit to that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, partnerships, as I said before, so key. Networking can have a bit of a stigma involved. I think you and I have overcome that being in such a place as Cub, as sort of it's allowed us to break through that ceiling. And I know a lot of people's biggest fear is also public speaking. Again, that's something I had to overcome pretty quickly. That marketing job I spoke of that built the foundations for my skill set, that company, that was an event company. So we used to run education events all over Australia. Sometimes I think one year we put on like 2 to 250 events, individual events over 1 year. So it was just back-to-back stuff. And that taught me a lot about building networks. It taught me a lot about, the power of, your personal brand, the power of public speaking, and the power of, getting out there and just investing in yourself is another thing, which I feel like a lot of people just get stuck in their daily routine. They don't go out and try and educate themselves on a new skill, or they may be afraid to learn a new system. If we get presented with a system that can increase efficiency in the business, I'm 100% going to take it and learn that and get the team to, indoctrinate themselves through it too. So I love change. I think that's another important thing to embrace. If you're ever wanting to be an entrepreneur or start a business, you have to embrace change. It's the only way. It's the only way to get ahead and the only way to survive. Yeah. If we didn't embrace change, we'd still be the agency we were 5 years ago, and would be dead.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Facts. So I also want to talk to you a little bit about some of the issues that you think are in the current business landscape today, and why does it need changing?
Yeah, I thought about this one. I think being topical with what's going on in the world right now. There are a couple of macro things that have happened that affected, every business around the world, which is COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
But then there's also from a industry point of view with our industry in marketing and advertising. iOS changes, Apple's restricting the ability to track users online through cookies. So they're pulling that ability. Which is going to make it really hard for advertisers, businesses, platforms, everybody who markets their business online to be able to attribute, investment online to an action on their website. So
that sounds like that's undermining your business model half.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly right, because we're results driven. We're going to have to then start educating the importance of not just results, but also, just putting your brand out there without the expectations of getting a return from ad spend.
And what's the intention behind wanting to limit you being able to track that?
Well, it's Apple's instructions, and that's something that they've put across all their products.
It's a privacy thing?
It's a privacy thing. It's come down to the erosion of privacy, I think, from, starting from the Cambridge Analytica breach from Facebook all the way through to now with COVID, and there's so many things in between that's just eroded the trust with privacy.
But Apple still get to keep that data, though.
Be correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know, there might be a hidden motive there, but in all, they're sort of doing it in response to the erosion of trust with privacy. And, you know, I can totally understand that it got to a point where, you know, the way that we, you know, search the web and the way that we, you know, get hit with ads across all platforms, search engines, social, it becomes a bit scary, you know.
There'll surely be a conspiracy theory here about Apple.
Well, I think what's confused a lot of people is privacy and the ability to track someone are two very different things. You know, the reason why tracking is there is to be able to serve information based on their interests, which gives you a better user experience. The privacy is a whole nother thing, and you know, that's obviously up to the companies who store that data. I know if you're opting into emails and you're getting hit with emails, then that's always been around, right? So, but I think those two things have been, I think, just mushed together, and I think the response to that is just to completely remove that ability for people to be followed. So who knows what's going to happen, but I think, look, with COVID and that event happening right now, challenging a lot of businesses and how we market ourselves online, I think small businesses, there's going to be, you know, a bit of an impact there. And I think the one thing that, you know, I'd love to see change, particularly in Australia, is just more support with small businesses. It's very hard to start a business and sustain it for many years, as you know. And I think, just the overall awareness of, if your mate's starting a business, or, you know, you got a friend down the road with a coffee shop, like, support your network. And it goes a long way to be able to, you know, just give back a little bit to the people around you who have businesses. And it's as easy as, you know, referring, which we get a lot of referrals, and 50% of our new business relies on that. So that's a great way to be able to help each other, is, you know, refer each other, support your local business, you know, share something online if, you know, they're posting things, whatever it is, you know, like their page. Simple little things like that add up to a lot. And I think in Australia, you know, small business accounts for, I think it was like 60 or 70% of tax, something crazy. So the majority of the tax that the government gets is from small business, and that's why that award we won was such a great recognition, because it recognised small to medium-sized businesses in Australia. So, you know, we sometimes have small poppy syndrome in Australia and want to see other people fail, but I think that needs to be flipped on its head.
That tall poppy syndrome is a very real thing.
It is.
You know, I see it all the time, where I feel like when someone is coming up with a new venture, there can be some criticism that comes with that. There really needs to be a cultural shift towards supporting. I 100% agree with you. You know, having had some experiences where, you know, individuals don't necessarily wish the best upon you. But I guess that's what makes us hungry too, to an extent too. It drives us to want to win even
100%. Yeah.
I was talking to someone the other day. It's like, lines of business, you know, like whether you've got that personality to go and hunt, I guess, go and win business or grow that business. I think that's a huge point with respect to that. And I completely agree with, I guess, people wanting to support local business and your mate. I think as soon as you know someone who is about to start a business, you should get behind them, buying a product from them. I seen a meme the other day. It's like, as soon as you are purchasing something from a small business, that's someone doing a happy dance behind the table. You know, that's something that's I guess I'm passionate about. But talk to us about marketing. There'll be plenty of people who want to get some insights into marketing and how they can grow their marketing. Obviously, your expertise lies in advertisements. But what are some of the tips and tricks that you can give to some businesses around marketing?
I mean, marketing is such a generic term these days, isn't it? And I think it's become so splintered over time with the complexity of technology and how we, you know, interact with each other online as well through social media. So, look, tips, we get some businesses that are just not marketable, or maybe they're not ready to invest in marketing. You know, we usually work with businesses who are online, that have the ability to sell a service or product online to allow us to, you know, advertise them nationally versus, say, your local business. And because we're performance orientated as well, we have to work with a brand who is able to generate some return from our efforts as well. So I think, like, if you're starting out, the biggest thing to know is, like, think of the stages of businesses, right? Like 0 to 100 grand is your idea phase. 100 grand to $500,000 is your sort of startup phase. And then $500,000 to 2 million is growth phase. And if you're in any of those stages in business, then the number one thing you should be looking at is driving revenue for the business. I think people, when they start a business, like, we get some companies that come to us and they say, look, we've just started this website. We launched it last month. What can you do to grow our brand? It's like, well, not much, because there's so many things that you need to set up in the background of the business to before you even start, throwing money out there in the abyss. So, like, getting the CRM structured, having a website that actually converts traffic, or a salesperson to convert the leads, having customer service set up, your social set up. There's a lot of different departments there, your accounting, finance, whatever it is, before you start going and working with agencies. So I think, people just want to get rich overnight. It takes a long time. The first year should be spent about obviously developing the foundations, but try and get some wins on the board before you start reaching out and getting help from an agency. There's other resources that I'm sure you can get if you're simply just not sure what to do. Then there's platforms like Fiverr. There's community groups on Facebook that you could tap into. Social media allows us to tap into information and get a network or referral very quickly. So I just encourage anyone to set themselves up a little bit better before they start speaking to agencies. But also just focus on driving revenue. It's simple as that. If you're an e-commerce store, you should have enough stock and know your levels of stock, and have your message to market mapped out, and actually go out there and improve your product before you then start validating it from a commercial point of view. Too many people try and skip those stages and think that they're in scale phase, where really they're in ID phase.
And give me your thoughts on socials. We're investing heavily on socials. We really feel like the likes of your Facebook and Instagram will become the next search engine. I already see, like, my wife Nicole, for example. We want to find a restaurant to eat at locally. She'll type it into Instagram.
No way.
And she'll be like, okay, places to eat, or businesses Sydney, or what it might be. So I see it being like the next big thing, especially as the next generation comes through. They're using Instagram, they're using TikTok. The sort of platforms they're using are changing entirely, right? So what are your thoughts on socials? Is it worth it? Is it not? How do you start? Because I also see so many, I could say, podcasts out there. Not that we're one of those, but plenty of them will buy followers, just to get to that 10K to get, I guess, the credibility, which I tend to agree with. I tend to agree that when you go to a page and you've got 40 followers, you're like, oh, wow, they're starting off. There aren't too many people following them. But if you go on day one and they've got 3 posts, but they've got 10 grand followers, you're like, whoa, okay, like, these guys are someone to follow. It's just so inauthentic. And no doubt you're going to touch on this, but from an engagement perspective, there is no engagement. And that's something that we want to focus on. We want to focus on engaging content, putting that out there, and then the followers will come, the recognition will come, the proof will be in the pudding. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think every business, if you're a consumer-facing business, or even if you're B2B, you should have some sort of form of social platform to for people to be able to do some research on your business, or enable you to do some advertising, and just as much as having your website visible on Google and search engines, and doing some SEM, some AdWords. So I always think of a healthy relationship between not trying to put your efforts across 10 different platforms, but think of the ones that make sense to your business, and also invest a bit of money in the beginning across a couple of platforms, so you're not just relying on the one. And once you've got the wins on the board on one, then move over to the next that makes the most sense. A classic example is a local cafe shop is going to benefit probably more so from search engine marketing, because people search on Google, and now you're saying, you're sort of, your wife searches on Instagram as well. So just as important to be on Instagram as it is to be on Google, not just relying on that one platform as, the way to do business. I see a lot of people having the one strategy and the one vehicle that they're playing with, but I feel that's really risky. But also you don't want to dilute your efforts so that you're, marketing across 10 different platforms and spending all this time posting every day. You can easily outsource that and get a VA. But the ones that make most sense to us for most of our brands we work with, definitely Facebook and Instagram. Facebook's much heavily focused on advertising these days than it is posting. If you post something on a business page on Facebook, no one's going to see. That's less than probably 1% of your following. So you got to pay to play on Facebook. Instagram is much more of sort of a catalog style of platform, so you can totally still get cut through there. The Insta stories, such a untapped real estate right now that a lot of businesses probably don't utilize. I do it a lot socially, and it's the one sort of thing on Instagram that I look at is these are the stories. It's the real life actions that's happening today and tomorrow. And then, I think just having your eye out on what are the new platforms that are coming through. So TikTok's obviously a huge one for the younger generation. I'd probably say that, 80% of people probably use TikTok more so than Instagram, from, teenagers between 10 and 20. Or I don't know what the youngest age on TikTok is. I don't use it personally, but we're starting to offer that as a solution now. Any platform that has the ability to have an ad platform where we can buy media through, we'll certainly test those platforms. And LinkedIn's really great from B2B point of view. If you're looking to position your personal brand as an authority in your space, then LinkedIn's phenomenal. So there's no better platform to do that. I use my LinkedIn profile to promote what I'm doing, not just within business, but also outside of business to develop my personal brand, not just my company brand. So just, understanding each platform for the different purposes and what purpose they serve, and not really saying and thinking whether Facebook and Google is better. It's more so how they can complement and serve the purpose of each. Because they each have a different power.
I think you've touched on a pretty good point that I think most, particularly small businesses, neglect a little bit, and it's the difference between your personal brand and your company brand. And I know that's something that you've invested in a fair bit, and that's something that you just mentioned on LinkedIn. You invest a fair bit in your personal brand. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, why it's important to differ, and how you can go about doing that.
This is applicable to any industry. Even someone who has a successful e-commerce store, I see that person also having quite a huge following on their personal brand, right? Because people admire, they look up to that. An e-commerce store or a fashion label is tied to a person usually, right? So that person epitomizes that brand.
You don't just have to get an influencer and pay them be the face of your company.
That's right. Obviously you get models to do the shoots for your new releases, and that's what a lot of fashion companies we work with do.
Do they work?
I wouldn't expect some. I think it's you're looking at it very differently. I think like an influencer is great to be able to showcase the brand and do the photos and the videos for the purpose of marketing. But if you're just going to pay an influencer $500, or some of them cost upwards of $5-10 grand, and you're expecting to get lots of results out of that just from that one post, then it's probably not the safest and most resound strategy. I think it's just one element in lots of different things that you need to be doing. Influencing is probably not as powerful as what it used to be, but can certainly still work so long as it's done right. And so long as it's relevant to that influencer, and that influencer does epitomize that brand. That's also very important. Contextualization in branding. But I think the personal branding, the reason why it's important is because no one can copy you as a person. Someone can copy your brand, and your personal brand is what people buy into a lot of the time. People buy relationships, particularly from a service point of view, particularly with what we're doing. They're probably going to want to know, how is GMS formed? Who runs GMS? What is their vision? Who am I actually buying into? Who's behind this salesperson? So I need to showcase the fact that I've got authority in the space, so I know what I'm doing. It's not just some person sitting at home behind their computer as a one-man band. It's actually a trusted brand, that's got accolades.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've always invested the time and energy into my personal branding as an authority, so I can leverage that with the business and whatever businesses I'm doing. GMS is, my first successful business, but I plan that to do hopefully more down the track, and that's if I'm going to ever try and pretend to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to have to, have a few different things going, but also to de-risk my own career as well. And I always believe in having, multiple streams of income. So my personal brand to me is always going to be there with me, whereas the brand might not. That's the way I look at it.
I think to add to that as well is when you invest in your personal brand, as long as it's authentic and it's real, people want to work for people.
Yeah.
And people want to work with good people. Like, I see way too many people neglect the fact that business is a people game. And it's so hard to get to know the inside workings of a business by looking at their outside brand, because it's so easy to fabricate an image.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much trust to be built when you've got a strong personal brand.
Yeah, trust is the key here.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's something that we pride ourselves on in business, being trust. And every business should be built on that, really. So I think that's a huge factor, being able to build your personal brand for the leader. That's going to put you in good stead with not only your clients, but also your employees, your staff, your suppliers. It's just an easier step in the door to building a stronger relationship.
That's it, 100%.
So tell us a little bit about your vision. You've mentioned, where you're at with GMS, successful, some of the challenges that you have, I guess, in business as well. But what's next in business, do you think, generally, but also for yourself personally?
Well, it's taken for a good part of 3 to 4 years to get myself out of the day-to-day management of, bringing clients into the business and managing them, which has enabled me to focus on the growth of the brand, thinking 3 to 5 years ahead of time, growing the team, hiring talent, which we're, sort of doubling down this year. We've got our sales manager. We'll have 2 salespeople by next month, and hopefully 3 by mid-year. And same with the account team. We've got 3 account managers now, another probably 5 ad support functions underneath. A new marketing coordinator who's joined us, copywriter as well, graphic designer. So we've really increased our resources over the past 12 months. So for me, next 3 to 5 years, GMS, we want to, our vision is to be the best advertising solution in Australia, and being able to support, more robust brands as well, which we've got a lot of great brands that are working with us. And then outside of that, there's other projects I have on the go. As I said, I'm just continuing to build my personal brand, hopefully getting around and doing more, positioning with myself and networking, doing these sort of podcasts every so often as well. Because I think what really drives me is not necessarily sitting in my office and micromanaging my team. I want to be out of there to support them as much as possible and drive them and, be that sort of visionary in the business that they can lean on, and drive the projects and, the sort of future for the brand. But I also want to be able to, spend my time doing what I love, and that's sort of getting out there and networking. And I've got a wine label I just started last year. It's very much in the juvenile stage right now. Probably will take until the end of this year to kick off. It's called Bondo Rosé. Nice. So that's just a little fun thing that I'm doing at the moment on the side. Getting into products a little bit, because I've always done service, and services. They're great. I love services. I'm always going to have a service, and whether I've got the business on or even my personal brand, I'm always going to be sort of at sort of availability to sort of give my advice to any businesses out there, particularly in marketing. But it's hard to say what that next business is going to be if there is another business in the next 3 to 5 years. But I'm always keeping my finger on the pulse and always open to new ideas. And as I said, it's just being open, I think, is the most important thing. Because if we're just sitting there plodding along, doing our own thing. You know, we're happy at the level of growth we're at, or maybe we just want to stay at that certain revenue level. That's really scary for me. I don't like comfort. I always like to feel like I've got something on the go. I've got a new venture or a new project or something to improve what we're doing. Because if we're not innovating, then the industry is going to take over us, and there'll be someone there behind us to take our clients. You know,
what I like the idea of you having Bondi Rosé as well is it's kind of like a little baby for you in the sense that
it's also practicing what we preach. Yeah,
yes,
that's
exactly.
It's a bit of a test and project to say, okay, yeah, we're an agency, but we can also build our own product business and put it through the business, the GMS, and market it and see how it goes. And we want to start getting involved in more products and not just that, but if we're marketing and helping all these brands that we've helped well over 300 brands since we started, then why not have a couple of our own that we can test through the business too, that we've got a bit more ownership in, because we've just got such a great opportunity now to help businesses. So it's a bit of fun to be able to that's right.
And circling back, I think you'll be perfectly placed to do that because you are investing so much in your personal brand. So as soon as you guys launch that, you can release it on LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever it might be.
That's it. Yeah, I think like one thing there that we got to be careful of, and that I've been diligent of, is not having too many things to distract you, because I only want to be involved in other businesses that we can sort of put into the portfolio of GMS versus, an example would probably be if I wanted to go and create a cafe or a local business that requires me to physically be there in hospitality and then have an agency on the side, and that might be a bit difficult to do. So I don't want to dilute and take away from the growth of the agency. That's still priority number one for me. Whatever I'm doing outside of that, it always has to fit into that same working rhythm. Otherwise you're just really distracting yourself.
I think with any venture that you do, it needs to complement the other.
Totally.
Otherwise, you do become diluted. You run around like a headless chicken.
Yeah, that's right. But I don't want to do that.
You definitely don't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
Look, I tend to really agree with, particularly when we talk about vision and where business is going. If we just add on to that, personal brand, I feel like more people will focus on personal branding. But how far is too far? Because, mate, I don't know about you, and I might eat my words here, but it is. I mean, you might have one. It's cringeworthy when they have their own name as a website. Have you got one?
Well, in relation to what? Sorry?
Like a WilliamFreitas.com.
Oh, mate.
Mate, I just can't.
I do, but only because I was doing a lot of speaking.
Okay.
And
that
as a coach,
sense.
So I was going down that. I've done a few talks with our clients because we've got a lot of coaching clients. So we promote lots of events and webinars, and I've been invited on stage to a few of those. So I did so at that time just so, because I have my own programs at the time as well. So people doing research, most coaches will have their own personal website, but I don't really look at it. I don't use it. It's just there in case I need it,
So have you pulled it down?
No, it's still there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still there. It's just sort of bit of a mimic for what the agency is really. It's just more my personal brand. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you totally don't need one unless you're, promoting yourself as a brand.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. I went out on a limb there, and you did have one.
Should have asked me first.
I should have asked you.
No, but in context, you don't want to just do it to show off.
Exactly right. If you're a cafe owner, there's no need to create your own website.
No, not at all. In my space particularly, most, if I think of the top marketers and advertisers in the world, they all use their personal brand. They often don't even use their agency name. So obviously all those, business authorities, they have to have their own personal branding and on their website, and most of them don't even use their agency name. They'll just use their personal name as their agency. So it's more contextual in my industry versus others.
Nothing against having your own name, but
that's it.
It works in some industries.
It does, totally.
Love that.
Yeah.
Blake, mate, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a blast.
My pleasure.
We've had lots of fun. To finish off, do you want to give you a little bit of a plug? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so our agency website's www.gms.co. We just shorten that URL so we don't have to say growthmarketingsystems.com.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to follow me, it's at bmccullough, and our agency Instagram is at gms.co.
Perfect. Awesome, mate. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Socius, thank you for joining us today. Please hit the subscribe button if you've enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to be part of the Socius community, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in touch. Cheers.